First of all today, the EU Exit and Trade, open brackets, Strategy and Negotiation, close brackets, Subcommittee is the snappy title for the meeting of Theresa May's cabinet ministers today as they try to hammer out an agreed approach to Brexit. Key ministers who don't always see eye to eye on the issue, like Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson and Chancellor Philip Hammond, will be closeted in the wood-panelled Tudor splendour of the Prime Minister's country retreat of Chequers. And there's clearly something in the air because we also hear this morning that Jeremy Corbyn is planning to set out Labour's new position on Brexit at a speech early next week. Exciting times for people like our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. Well, Norman, I'm sure you'd like to be a fly on the wall at Chequers, but what can you tell us? Will unity break out at the end of this marathon summit?
Well, I think it'll have to break out. It may not be peace in our time, but there will have to be some sort of agreement because the option of there being no deal is frankly so catastrophic for the government because it would suggest that the divisions are so profound that any sort of agreement is beyond Mrs May, and the message it would send out to EU negotiators is frankly we're all over the place, we haven't a clue what we want. So there has to be some sort of arrangement, and over the past few weeks, gradually, slowly, incrementally, Mrs May's been seeking to sort of whittle away the areas of disagreement, to refine and refine those areas where ministers are seemingly locked in conflict. That said, I'm pretty sure at the end of the day, it's going to be a deal that involves some fairly high-wire verbal gymnastics to keep all parties on board, because the gap remains pretty much the schism there has been from the referendum between those who believe the absolute priority in the negotiations must be trade and securing continued access to the single market without vast amounts of new barriers and border controls and tariffs, versus those who've always prioritised sovereignty and taking back control and giving ourselves the freedom to strike our own trade deals. That tension still remains there, so there's going to have to be some form of language to try and bridge that.
Let's talk about Labour's position, because we've been told there is going to be a speech by Jeremy Corbyn. How much can we really expect in terms of a new line or a clarification on Labour's position regarding the negotiations?
I think the honest truth, Labour's position is, shall we say, somewhat fluid. It is a work in progress. But when you talk to shadow cabinet members, they all seem to be of the view that gradually, slowly, incrementally, the Labour Party is heading off towards the land called customs union. In other words, it will end up in a position where it will either back the or a customs union. Is the key difference between it and the Conservative Party. Now, they're not there yet, because key and influential figures like John McDonnell don't like the idea, and Jeremy Corbyn has not signed up on the dotted line to that idea. But I think there is a view that that is inevitably where they're going to end up. And why that matters is that is a position which Tory Remainers could back. There are plenty of Tory Remainers who think it is daft of Mrs May to rule out the option of a customs union, remaining in a customs union. Therefore, if Labour was to back a customs union and Tory Remainers were to back a customs union, Mrs May could yet be defeated on the issue.
Norman Smith, thank you very much. Well, we're joined now in the studio by two MPs with rather different views of life after Brexit. It's the Conservative Peter Bone and Labour's Rupa Huq. Welcome to both of you. Peter Bone, before we talk about the summit at Chequers today, let's just go over some of the fallout from the transition debate and what will happen to EU citizens. What do you think should happen to the status of EU citizens who arrive in Britain after we've left in March 2019?
Well, good morning.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Afternoon. A celebration today. It is 400 days exactly until we leave this dreadful European Union superstate. And my position has been, and when I was one of the leading campaigns, we decided that anyone who was here before the referendum had rights to stay, and that we would have a new immigration policy afterwards. It now seems to transpire that it will be people who arrive after the 29th of March who will be subject to a new immigration policy, which of course we haven't yet decided in Parliament what that will be.
Theresa May said it will differ. The rights of those will differ, but the EU has rejected that and is asking for full rights for any EU citizens who arrive after March 2019. Would you be prepared to accept a climb down from the government on that specific issue?
Well, not. I mean, I think the thing about the referendum, there were a few things that we know were key, and one of the top ones was ending free movement, making our own laws in our own country, judged by our own judges, and not giving billions of pounds each year to the EU. So, if any of those are broken, we've lost faith with the British people. But I don't think that's the case, because I think the Prime Minister said there's going to be a registration scheme and that new arrangements will apply in due course.
Right, but during that transition period, because that's what we're talking about, a government source is quoted as saying, expect the UK to back down on different rights for EU citizens who arrive after March 2019 in the face of resistance from Brussels. So would you expect and would you accept a climb down from the government for EU citizens during that transition period?
What government spokesman said that on the record?
No, a government source is quoted.
Yes, of course, and those things, I mean...
but my question is, would you accept a climb down?
No, of course not. The point is...
that's clear.
It is, because the British people voted to end free movement, and we can't therefore have free movement.
Right. The transition deal is one thing. Labour's position, what are you expecting Jeremy Corbyn to say when he gives his speech on Monday?
Well, I mean, I don't know what's going to come out of his mouth. I know that there will be a speech on Monday. I mean, I think a transition period is responsible and sensible. It was Labour who called for that first. And there has been a change overnight, hasn't there? Apparently it was sneaked into these ministers' red boxes that now the government wants a different period to the... Well, in fact, the EU has rejected not only the freedom of movement. Now the government is now saying no changes to freedom of movement, and they want 18 months. So the period of this transition has changed, and it just shows how weak and divided they are. The fact that this away day is happening at all is to sort of bang their heads together and be relayed.
Fine, but on that basis, what should Labour's... Right, well, what is Labour's position?
Well, we're not fixated by an exact number of months or a sort of time period, but we think it should be as long as necessary. I think it should be as long as necessary. Businesses want certainty.
Right, but what about on the customs union? Should Labour now be saying very clearly Britain has to stay part of a, if not the customs union?
Well, we're saying that already. We want something that replicates the benefits of a customs union. I would like it to be the customs union, but I think our leadership position is that we want something that we want the benefits of.
Right, well, saying they want the benefits of remaining part of some sort of alignment with the EU is not quite the same as saying we want to remain and would negotiate to remain within a or the customs union. John McDonnell has said all options should be open. So
yeah, we're not cutting off our nose to spite off our face. So these options are still on the table. Yeah, same with the single market as well. We want to retain the benefits of that.
Right, retain the benefits, but would you like the Labour leadership to say we should be part of the single market?
Personally, yes, but I mean there are some technicalities about whether we go down an EFTA route or an EEA route. There was actually a debate yesterday in Westminster Hall on some of these things, and the minister replying from the Brexit department kind of said they're not changing course. They're not going to consider any alternatives, even if there was to be no deal. So they're just carrying on with this crazy position that we have, which is quite unclear anyway.
Right, Faiza, I mean, you are close to the leadership. Would you like to hear Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell state clearly on Monday or at some point soon that Labour would back staying in the single market and the customs union?
No, I think the place where we start on this is what it means for people and for inequality between regions and jobs. And in that case, then, you know, the customs union makes a lot more sense. The single market, of course, is tricky because actually, we're right, we wouldn't have a seat at the table. And there is a big issue there about people voting to have more control. And so I think single market is a bit more of a tricky issue. But I think the customs union, in terms of the impacts on people's lives. So, and I'm glad that Corbyn has already come out and said that there's support of a customs union as well. But I think it's completely practical and logical to think about what the end point is and work back from that. And that is what the Labour leadership is doing right now.
You wouldn't accept Britain being part of a customs union with the European Union. But to just go back to that transition period before we get to the end state, what did you make of the phrase, transition will take as long as it takes?
Well, I think we might like to call it an implementation period because
all right, implementation period will take as long as it takes. How long should it be?
Well, the Prime Minister said two things. The implementation period will be time limited, but if it can be shortened, so be it. So that's what I take it to mean, that if we can do things earlier and it suits us and the European Union to do that.
And if it goes over 2 years, what would you...
because the Prime Minister said it will be time limited.
Yeah, time limited, but it could still be over a 2-year period.
Well, I think the time limited period will be the end of the budgetary period, which will be the end of 2020, which is what the EU wants. But if you can do it earlier, fine.
If you were at Chequers now, what would you be saying to the Prime Minister?
I'd be congratulating the Prime Minister on what she's doing, and I'd say to some of the people around the table, be a little bit more cheerful and upbeat about Brexit.
Who?
Let's pull a name. The Chancellor, say. He's such a dour sort of fellow, trying to get all the figures right. He should be much more upbeat and saying, this is the great thing for Britain. I mean, he was the one, I think, coined the phrase, we're all Brexiteers now. So a little bit more upbeat.
Right, if you think the Prime Minister's done very well, why are they holding the summit?
Yeah.
Why holding the summit? You know, it's quite a good idea when you have cabinet government to involve the government.
Or get agreement.
Well, and move things on.
Bang their heads together.
No, look, I know we're on the 21st revision of the Labour Party's policy. You can't even tell me what it is.
We've been clear.
No, you've not been clear on anything. And actually, to the credit to Jeremy Corbyn, he's resisted those people that want to try and rerun the referendum. The situation is, what the government is doing, it's hit all its timescales. It's made the first agreement.
So, as I say again, why the summit then? Why do you need a summit? If it's all going so well, and if there has been so much progress, why is there a summit where ministers are going to be locked in together all day until final agreement is made? Why is that?
It's going to go on late, isn't it?
When you have a cabinet and when you have a sub-cabinet, you go along, you talk about things, and why not do it at Chequers? It's quite a nice house, and give them tea and coffee and they'll be very happy.
Will you be disappointed, Rupert, if Jeremy Corbyn doesn't set out more clearly on staying part of the customs union and single market on Monday? What will you do?
I mean, I've had soundings that there will be some sort of shift. I don't know. I mean,
you've had soundings.
We'll wait and
have you what from the leadership?
I mean, at the moment, what we have, because we're not in government, are we? We have the worst of all worlds. So if you're a leaver, the fact that these arrangements are being lengthened and lengthened, I mean, we weren't really that much in the EU in the first place. We were not in the single currency. We were not in Schengen. We were maybe only 60% in. But sort of, it's the worst of all worlds. If you're a Remainer, they've sold out the European principles.
What are the soundings that you've had from Labour that there's going to be a shift?
Well, I think there already has been a shift. So we're opposing the EU withdrawal bill because it gives carte blanche, because it's a ruddy rubbish piece of legislation.
No, you're stopping EU laws being made into effectively British laws to come into effect immediately after we leave the EU. You're trying to block the current legislation from coming in. I mean, that was an absurd position. It didn't make any sense whatsoever. And it was done pure... No, it wasn't. It was done by party political reasons.
Let Rupert respond.
I think there was Lord Carlisle in the Lords said that some of these impact... We're heading into the non-impact assessment.
Is he a Liberal Democrat?
He was a terrorism assessor by this government, and he said that it's a suicide note. Some of these, this non-assessed impact future that we're going into.
So the EU withdrawal is the Labour Party's view is a suicide note.
What we've said is the note you signed, Peter, 62 of your colleagues, that was a bit disturbing.
What, supporting the Prime Minister, telling her she's doing a good job?
It was holding a gun to her head and the whole country's head. And it was quite disturbing that it was actually the government's anti-corruption champion who headed that up. I think that's
all right. We're going to leave it there. And Lord Carlisle is a crossbencher, actually. Now.
Is he?
Yeah.
He's former Lib Dem,
but that's just for clarification.